Welcome back. In our previous session, we traveled back in time to the smoky factory floors of the early 20th century. We looked at how strategy began as a quest for internal order, organizing the labor process, coordinating massive multi-divisional corporations, and managing efficiency through the lens of scientific management. We explored the world of Alfred Chandler and Igor Ansoff, where the primary goal was keeping the internal corporate machine running smoothly. But today, we are stepping out of the factory and into the competitive arena. We are moving into part 2 of our exploration of Chapter 2. We are leaving behind the era where the main concern was internal coordination and entering the era of positioning. This is the era dominated by one towering figure, Michael Porter. If the previous era was about how to manage a corporation, this era is about how to win a war. It is about how firms, and even nations, navigate a hostile external environment to seize that elusive prize. Competitive advantage. So, let's settle in and unpack the Porterian discourse that has come to define modern strategic management. To understand the magnitude of Michael Porter's contribution, we have to look at what came before him in the field of industrial economics. Before Porter, the prevailing wisdom was summed up in a model called structure, conduct, performance. It was a fairly deterministic, almost fatalistic view of the world. It argued that the structure of an industry dictated how a firm could behave. Whether a perfect competition, oligopoly, or monopoly, as economists would usually describe it, the firm was seen as a passive boat floating on the ocean of the market. If the waves were rough, you got tossed around. The market structure determined your conduct, and that conduct determined your performance. In a perfectly competitive market, you would be a price taker, earning just normal profit. In an oligopoly, you would have some monopolistic power to determine prices and hence secure abnormal profits. The firm had very little agency. Porter looked at this and said, "No, that is not the whole story." He revised this model fundamentally. He argued that while the industry structure does influence a firm, the firm is not helpless. Through smart strategy, through conduct, a firm can actually push back. It can alter the structure of the industry. It can build barriers. It can differentiate itself. And it can change the rules of the game. This is the strategic agency. Porter gave power back to the managers. He suggested that if you position yourself correctly, you can earn abnormal returns, regardless of the industry average. You can achieve a competitive advantage. Now, that phrase, competitive advantage, is thrown around in boardrooms every day, but Porter gave it a very specific economic and managerial weight. He didn't just apply it to companies, he applied it to nations. He argued that the competitiveness of a nation isn't just about natural resources or gold reserves, it's about the strategy and structure of its domestic firms. In fact, Porter elevated strategy from a business problem to a political one, a biopolitical problem, where the health of the nation is measured by the competitiveness of its industries in the global market. But let's bring this down to the firm level, because that is where the rubber meets the road for management accounting. Porter argued that despite the complexity of business, there are really only two ways to win. We call these generic strategies. You can either be cheaper than everyone else, or you can be different than everyone else. That's it. Cost leadership or differentiation. Let's break that down using a simple equation. The chapter highlights value for money equals value divided by price. If you are pursuing a cost leadership strategy, you are attacking the denominator, the price. You are doing everything in your power to strip out costs. optimizing the supply chain, using just-in-time inventory systems, automating production. So you can offer a decent product at a lower price than your rival. Think of the Toyota production system. The goal isn't to be the most luxurious, it's to be the most efficient, passing that efficiency on to the customer as a lower price or keeping it as a higher margin. On the other hand, if you are pursuing differentiation, you are focused on the numerator, the value. You are trying to increase the perceived benefits, the quality, the brand cachet, or the features. You want the customer to feel that your product is unique. If you succeed, you can charge a premium price. Think of a high-end camera maker or a luxury fashion house. They aren't trying to save pennies on production. They are trying to add dollars to the perceived value. Porter warns that you must choose. If you try to do both, if you try to be the cheapest and the most luxurious, you risk getting stuck in the middle. You end up with a confusing brand and a contradictory operating model. Now, how does a manager decide which path to take? Porter provides a toolbox of 3 interconnected analytical frameworks. If you have studied business, these will be familiar, but I want us to look at them as a cohesive system rather than just a checklist. First, you look outward. You analyze the industry using the 5 forces model. Most people just think about their direct rivals, the company across the street. But Porter says competition is bigger than that. You have to look at the bargaining power of your suppliers. Can they squeeze your margins? You look at the bargaining power of buyers. Can they demand lower prices? You look at the threat of new entrants. How easy is it for a startup to eat your lunch? And you look at the threat of substitutes. Is there a different product entirely that could make you obsolete? This model helps you understand the battlefield. If supplier power is high and barriers to entry are low, a cost leadership strategy might be suicidal because you can't control your costs. You might be forced into differentiation. Once you understand the external battlefield, you turn your gaze inward. This brings us to the second tool, the value chain. The value chain is a way of dissecting the firm. It breaks the company down into primary activities, such as inbound logistics, operations, marketing, and service, and support activities like HR and technology. The insight here is that your strategy lives in these activities. If you are a cost leader, your value chain looks different than a differentiator. A cost leader's procurement team is ruthless about price. A differentiator's procurement team might focus on sourcing the finest, rarest materials, regardless of cost. Every link in the chain must align with that choice of cheaper or better. Finally, Porter gives us a tool to get inside the heads of our rivals. It's called four-corner analysis. Instead of just looking at what a competitor is doing right now, you ask, what drives them? What are their assumptions about the market? What are their capabilities? By profiling them psychologically and strategically, you can predict how they will react to your moves. It's a bit like playing chess, but you are analyzing the psychology of the player across from you, not just the pieces on the board. So, we have this grand schema. A world of rational calculation, clear positioning, and competitive dominance. But there is a modern complication that this framework struggles to digest. Sustainability. The chapter raises a critical point here. For a long time, strategy was silent on social and ecological issues. It was all about profit maximization and market share. When sustainability finally entered the conversation, it was often forced through the Porterian filter. Porter and his colleague Mark Kramer introduced the idea of shared value. They tried to update these tools, the value chain and the 5 forces, to include social dimensions. They asked managers to map inside-out linkages, which are the impacts your firm has on the world, like emissions, and outside-in linkages, which are how the world affects your firm, like climate regulation. But here is the critique we need to consider. Is this genuine sustainability, or is it just strategic instrumentality? When Porter talks about corporate social responsibility, he is often asking, how can being green help us win? He frames sustainability as a way to differentiate a product or improve efficiency. For example, reducing energy use cuts costs. That's good for a cost leader. Selling fair trade coffee allows you to charge a premium. That's good for a differentiator. The danger, as the chapter suggests, is that sustainability becomes just another lever for competitive advantage rather than a moral imperative. It gets overcoded by the logic of profit. Here we are coming back to Deleuze and Guattari's notion that we discussed earlier, how everything in the world is translated into a single language. The language of profit, how it imposes a capitalist axiomatic of capital accumulation on human life. We aren't saving the planet because it's the right thing to do. We are doing it because it improves our competitive positioning. So, where does this leave us? In this chapter, we have traversed a massive shift in thinking. We went from the pre-Porterian world, where strategy was about coordinating the internal machine of the corporation, to the Porterian world, where strategy is about positioning that machine in a hostile, competitive landscape. We've learned that strategy is about choice. It is about deciding who the company is going to be, low cost or differentiator, and configuring every single activity in your value chain to support that choice. And we've seen that even as we face existential threats like climate change, the language of strategy tends to translate these moral challenges into opportunities for market dominance. This focus on positioning, value, and cost leads us directly to the next logical question. How do we capture that value in dollars and cents? How do we put a price tag on our strategy? That is exactly where we are going next. In Chapter 3, we will dive into the world of strategic pricing. We will see how these abstract concepts of value and competition are distilled into the specific numbers we charge our customers. Until then, I want you to look at the companies you interact with today. Ask yourself, are they competing on price? Or are they competing on difference? And is their sustainability pitch a human mission to be truly sustainable? Or is it just a strategy to sustain profits through competitive advantage in the marketplace? Thank you for listening.